Hello, I'm Rhian Crane and I have a PhD in the relationship between language and human perception. So, if this were 150 years ago, your cat would not be sleeping on your bed. It probably wouldn't even be in your house. In fact, if you were a teenage boy back then, chances are you spent a hell of a lot of time just chucking rocks at cats. So what happened? Why the change? Why don't we throw rocks at cats anymore? So 150 years ago, cats were not pets. They were vermin. They were one stage up from rats. Harming them wasn't considered cruel. They weren't companions. They were like just fun, moving targets. So what happened? How did they go from these dingy cellars to having their own rooms in our houses in some cases? Believe it or not, this wasn't just a gradual change in attitudes. This was deliberate rebranding by a few very particular individuals. So the Victorian era was a time of massive change. The cities were changing, the landscape was changing, technologies were changing, the Industrial Revolution, the class system was changing, and so were attitudes towards animals. For probably the first time in that part of the world, ideas around animal protection were actually gaining traction. In 1822, Britain passed the first animal welfare law, the Cruel Treatment of Cattle Act, to protect livestock from abuse. 13 years later, in 1835, the Protection of Animals Act came in to cover more species. Cats were not on this list, but there was a group of individuals, one in particular, who felt that they should be. By the middle of the 1800s, there were a few people who really cared about cats, and one guy in particular, Harrison Weir, who has probably done more for the reputation of cats than anybody in modern history. Harrison Weir was an illustrator by trade, but he had this deep affection for cats. He thought they were beautiful and graceful. He was genuinely distressed by the neglect and the cruelty that was just normalised in Victorian England. He wanted people to see them as he saw them, as beautiful companions and not vermin. Weir thought, well, we've got agricultural shows for people's pigs and the sheep and the chickens and horses and what have you. Why not cats? Now, this was ludicrous. In that time, this was a ludicrous concept. This would have been like holding a pageant for the sewer rats. It was laughed at by many people. So Harrison Weir is often credited as being the man behind the first ever cat show. That's not strictly true. There'd been one in Dublin about a decade earlier, and even one in London, but they didn't really take off. So in 1868, Weir rented the Crystal Palace in London, which is this huge glass structure, and hosted what's now considered to be the first competitive cat show. But there was a little problem in that there just weren't enough, he couldn't find enough cats. So according to legend, the cellars at Crystal Palace were teeming with stray cats. So apparently a bunch of workers were sent down to fetch some and bring them up into the cages to compete. Despite this minor obstacle early on, people lapped it up, they loved it. Victorians, they loved exhibitions, the weirder the better, this was the golden age of freak shows. But while it was very much a novel concept, it's totally on brand for the Victorians. Between 1871 and 1872, it practically went viral, it exploded. In 1871 alone, there were 4 cat shows in 6 months. Now, my understanding is that these were quite chaotic occasions, so they'd borrowed a load of cages from the Pigeon Society, and apparently it stank. You can imagine anxious cats in a crowded space, where many of them are stray cats, feral cats. Many of them died there, many of them just died as soon as they got home, many of them escaped. Transport was another issue. Many of the cats was just sent unaccompanied on trains and would either not come back or come back and they'd mysteriously changed breed and colour. Now, the judging categories were also pretty unconventional by today's standards. They had a prize for the fattest cat, £20. And also the entries were divided according to the social class of the owner as well. So the cats of the working classes would be in one category, and the cats of the aristocrats would be in another category. But Harrison Weir wanted working class people to attend these and get involved because his main motivation was animal welfare. You know, he wanted to promote responsible ownership and kind treatment. Even in the early 1900s, when this thing's been going for quite a while, there was a cat that managed to win as both a Manx cat and as a Japanese cat. But it gets so much better. In 1903, first prize for foreign breed class went to a lemur, because apparently sailors had a habit of calling lemurs Madagascar cats. The owner, of course, defended the win. I mean, the prizes were quite good back then. You could get 30 shillings and some silver spoons. Even the judge defended the decision, saying a lemur is a lemur and a Madagascar cat is a Madagascar cat. I don't know. Victorians and categories, they actually really love to categorise things. And this is the thing that Harrison Weir did that truly was different. So one of Weir's biggest contributions was actually the introduction of breeding standards. So Weir documented these standards of excellence, basically inventing the concept of a pedigree cat. It was a point system assigned to different physical features, which became the breed standards. And people followed them. He was the biggest name in cats at that time. He was the authority on cats. In 1887, the National Cat Club was formed, with Harrison Weir as president. It didn't last very long. He resigned within 5 years, saying that while he still cares deeply for cats, cat owners are intolerable. He said they were the most narcissistic group of people he'd ever met in his life, who were far more interested in winning prizes than cat welfare. Now his successor was another illustrator called Lewis Wain, who was famous for his kind of anthropomorphic cats in frocks illustrations. Creative as he was, and as devoted to cats as he was, apparently during his lifetime he illustrated about 150,000 cats, he reckoned. He was hopelessly disorganised and completely ill-suited for that role. In 1898, Lady Marcus Beresford, an aristocrat, is it aristocrat or aristocrat?
None of them sound right now.
She founded a rival organisation called the Cat Club, which, basically because she had more money, offered better conditions, nicer cages and just a more exclusive atmosphere. You couldn't just join that club as a member of the general public. And that lasted 5 years before the Cat Fanciers Association took over. But this is a really essential piece of the story because the press loved it, all this infighting and drama between these cat fanatics. It was priceless. So they keep putting headlines out about it. And, you know, all press is good press, right? It just gets it into the minds of the population more and more that this is just a thing, this is just a normal thing, this is what we do with cats.